Agriculture scientist Bruce French says if you put the right plant in the right place, it almost grows naturally. He spent over 30 years putting together the largest worldwide database of edible plants in the world. It has over 32,000 entries. In this conversation, we talk about what the journey has been like to put together that database, where it is today, what we can do with it, and how we can best use it moving forward in global regeneration and planetary health. I'm Natalie Forstbauer, editor-in-chief and founder of Heart and Soul magazine. I'm really excited you're here. Enjoy the conversation. How did you start building this database?
I started the database as such in 1999, but my journey started back in 1966. I was studying agriculture. I went to do a practical in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, fell in love with the place. So I came back and got married and took our 6-week-old daughter up into the jungle in Papua New Guinea. And then they asked me to teach in what's now a university. It was an agricultural college then. And the students said, don't teach us Australian plants and Australian methods. We don't live in Australia. So I was suddenly very ignorant. I knew nothing about tropical plants and had to start learning. So back in the 70s, I published a book on the edible plants of Papua New Guinea, which is sitting on the internet. We've updated, keep updating it. And then I thought, what about Solomon Islands? What about Timor? And just kept going. So all my life now, I've been 55 years, I've been trying to get information out of expensive books and science journals they can't understand and can't access back into plain English, lots of illustrations, and then deliver it back to the people who need it, which is the 1 or 2 billion who are malnourished and hungry in the rural tropical world. So,
and what's also incredible about your database is that it's not just a resource of what grows in different climates and different parts of the world, but also the nutritional value of what's in those different foods. And you also share how to grow them successfully.
Yes, that's the aim. And if you put the right plant in the right place, it almost grows naturally. So if a desert plant suits the desert, a swamp plant suits a swamp, a mangrove plant suits a mangrove. So put them all back in the right place. And then they're all saying go for diversity. All the nutritionists say if you eat a diverse range of plants, you'll end up with a healthy, balanced diet, but most of the rural poor in the tropics don't understand nutrition. They understand energy. If you eat it, you can do a day's work. But they don't know why a child's going blind every minute or a child's dying every 8 seconds from malnutrition. So it's just empowering them with information. So
it's powerful that actually made me teary when you said plants will grow where they're meant to grow.
Yeah,
it's so simple and so profound at the same time, because I think humanity is moved towards a needle that wants control and wants prediction and wants to do things their way. And what I'm hearing from you is nature is already showing us
yes,
what works.
And there's a mindset among scientists, let's reduce it down to one simple answer and one simple problem. So a very rich man who remained nameless has just given 40 million to a university in Tasmania to reduce all the 238 banana varieties in Uganda down to one rich in vitamin A. And I say, why not go around and tell people which plants are rich in vitamin A and let them enjoy all their bananas? They've got pest resistance, disease resistance. Some you dip in soup, some you boil, some you roast, some you bake. Why restrict all their rich food values and diversity down for some simplistic solution? There's plenty of plants in Uganda that are rich in vitamin A, and there's about 74 plants you can just squeeze the oil out of. It's oil-soluble vitamin. So the answers are there, but you can't make a fortune out of being practical and down to earth.
Mm-hmm. What do you want people most to know and understand about the work you're doing?
For me, it's, as I just indicated a minute ago, if you choose the right plant for the right place and keep it a diversity of varieties, and then don't over process it, don't take all the fibre out. The world's biggest killer at the moment is obesity. And they're all saying it's just because they're eating too much. They've just taken all the fibre out and over-refined the foods. And so it's going for a nice, rich, natural diversity of plants. And yesterday I was up to 32,540 edible species.
Yes. That's gotta feel so good. Bruce, that has got to feel so good.
Yeah.
What does it feel like? What does it feel like? Because you have so many, you have over 32,000. What does it feel like? Because I can't imagine what it felt like, you know, to get like the first even 100 documented, and then the 1,000, and then you hit the 10,000s, now you're into the 32,000. So what does it feel like to just even add one?
My daughter organised a party when we passed 30,000 and got various friends to come, so she thought that was significant. But it's lots of these plants have been underexplored, or in lots of countries the information is still in the heads of the older people who are often can't read and write, so they have a wealth of experience. And I say to them when I go there, I get an interpreter, and I say, if you'll teach me for the day, I'll photograph the plants, I'll send it back to your country so your children and your schools will have the information that you know. I don't make a cent out of it. I'm not aiming to make money out of it, just to keep the kids alive, basically.
Yeah. Bruce, how are you funding this?
I'm just an old age pensioner now. In the past, I've done short-term consultancies with biodiversity, FAO, lots of different organisations, which has got me to the countries, and then I stay on for a few weeks after I finish my consultancy and go to markets and gardens and places. So we've just got nominal running costs, but everything we produce is available free. So it's covered with a Creative Commons copyright 3, which means people can take it and share it and duplicate it, but they can't sell it and can't claim they own it. So
I love that. So such a gift. And I know Food Plant Solutions, for example, is using it in their garden program pamphlets, and using it worldwide to teach communities and families how to grow their own food, and using it in schools. And I'm just wondering what other organizations are using it.
I've sent copies to a whole range of organisations. The World Vegetable Centre in Taiwan, I used to know the director there well, but he's retired like old people do. And I've sent it to FAO, and some of the old stuff was on the EcoPort and a couple of the FAO websites. I sent it to Echo Florida, and anyone who goes there, they just give copies on flash drives these days, I suppose. It used to be on discs. So often when I'm contacting people around the world, they say, oh, we've already got your stuff. We got it from Echo Florida or someone else. So, yeah, my main aim is just to get it out where it's needed, and hopefully in the long term produce a transformation in all the things you're passionate about. Yeah, I send it out to all the organisations around the world. And I've spoken at a range of neglected and underutilised species conferences, and I do the same thing there. I just give everybody copies of it all and say the kindest thing you can do when you get home is copy it and share it with all your friends. Save as the postage. Saves money.
Yeah, I love that.
Lots of
and how is it being received? Like I know by certain organizations, like the ones you've mentioned, and Food Plant Solutions, it's received very openly. And I'm wondering what about other organizations? Like, is it something that
one that really was good with Food Plant Solutions, my books for Solomon Islands, they printed them out because lots of countries in the world don't have good electricity, don't have internet connections, so they printed them all out for Solomon Islands. And I don't bother chasing feedback, but I got some lovely anecdotes. A local lady from here in Tasmania went to Solomon Islands to visit a friend, went out to the market to buy food, and the lady said, we'll explain the food values of all the foods before you buy, so you know what you're buying. And the lady said, how do you know? And they said, oh, we've got these books to show it all to us. I've had that sort of story a few times. I've had emails from up northeast India. A college lecturer there on plants said my resources have equipped her for a lifetime. So they're nice to get that
Oh,
sort of feedback. So
yeah, that's amazing. And are they in, do universities tap into them, into it as well? Or what's that like?
varies. I've given it to a number of universities. Haven't even bothered chasing up with our local university. I gave a talk just recently to the University of California on Skype. All the students were scattered around the world. I've done that every couple of years, and I didn't this year, but I normally send a disc with all the stuff on and say, send it out, give it to all your students to share. So,
Oh, that's awesome.
I've given lectures at the University of Zimbabwe. I've forgotten which places now. So
Yeah, I am just so excited. I know that your database is out in a lot of places, and I'm just so excited because I know there's a lot of people who still haven't heard about it and who are going to be so excited to discover it and be able to share it and make big differences in their organizations. And
it is available online, but the one online's fairly hard to use. So we try to say to people, look, if you give us a contact, we'll get a bound runtime copy to you. Just a couple of comments. So set it up to look like a book, because most of the people have never seen a computer and don't know how to. And then I had a Solomon Island lecturer here, had never used a computer, didn't know how to. We just opened it up and said, so there's the forward button, just keep pressing. And he was doing a running commentary on how the ladies use all the plants in Solomon Islands. So, and then if they want to, they can press the print friendly and save me a copy as a book. And we try and do it as a runtime thing so that they can copy it and share it without having to find computer programs that'll work and all those sorts of things. So.
Fast. So right on the website, you can print it right off from your website, or we have to reach out to you?
All of the books I think you can print. I don't ever use the one on the website.
Yeah, you know what? I'm at your website right now, and I'm just going to look really quickly because I did look at your database and I just don't remember.
Along the bottom edge, it's got a thing, print friendly version. And if you click on there, it just lays it out to look a bit more like a ready to print without all the colors. And then in my case, I just saved the Guatemala ones a few minutes ago. I just say, I press the print button, but instead of printing it, I save it as a PDF and I'll send it off to Guatemala. So
that's awesome. So you can just save a portion of the database.
I can and reduce the database down for any particular country. If someone only wants India, I can ask the database to get rid of everything else, but it's better to do the whole thing and then just select. You can type in keywords. You have to. I want a fruit tree that grows in the desert in Africa, 4 words, and it'll suddenly give you about 300 fruit trees that grow in the deserts in Africa and print it out as a book.
Wow. That's amazing. And how can we best support you and what you're working on?
Basically promoting it around the place and making people aware of it. And we could send you a copy. I don't know what's the best link. Lately, I've been literally overwhelmed, people wanting requests around the world. And some countries, our mail service, they're not delivering to India at the moment. So you can't even send anything to India. So because of coronavirus. So if we sent you a copy on a USB flash drive of all our books and database and everything, people could contact you and share and get them or share them or.
Yeah, I would love that. We'll share them far and wide. I think we're going to, we're just in the infant stages of launching our Heart and Soil, and we're creating a resources page, and we'll definitely include you on the resources page, 100%. What have been some of your favorite discoveries or most interesting discoveries that you've found?
You find a plant in one country and they're not really using it, and then a little fruit in Vietnam, I saw it, and I knew it was edible, but they said, oh no, we don't use it. Then you suddenly find in Maldives, out in the middle of the Indian Ocean, they're making lots of snack foods out of it. So often you just putting together information. But a third of the world, particularly women, are iron deficient. anemic. So we need, that's for obvious reasons. So we need to make sure they're getting edible leaves. There's lovely books around. Maundu in Tanzania has got one. This leaf's a bit dry, this leaf's a bit slimy, and put them both together and you've got a lovely meal. So just empowering people. I'm just fascinated every day with what people somewhere in the world are doing with plants. A chap I've been in touch with in England, I can't think of his name at the moment, forages traditional British edible plants and supplies most elite restaurants in London. I went through his book and 184 of them are in Tasmania and we just call them weeds. So,
Wow.
and it's, I
Is
keep
that
it,
amazing?
yeah, the plant moves without the information, and all over the world, plants move to a new country because it's got a pretty flower or something. So when I was in China, caught up with a chap there in the institute in China who had just done an article on edible rhododendrons. Now, I went up to the rhododendron group here and I'm not sure they were happy with me. I'm not telling them which ones of their flowers are edible, but it's fun just sharing it around and putting it all together.
That's funny. Yeah, I remember I was born and raised on an organic vegetable and blueberry farm, Bruce. And at one point I decided that I was going to help and order seeds for the farm. And I ordered Amaranth, but it was purple Amaranth. It was really pretty. And because I saw other farmers who were specializing in greens and they were growing these. And I was like, I knew they grew on the farm like wild, but I still thought it would be really cool just to actually plant them and cut them and put them into salad mixes. And I never heard the end of it. I think it's been 30 years and I still get teased about it, buying mead seeds to put on the farm.
Yes. And I think it was the Chinese reference said, as far as I know, probably all amaranth species are edible. There's about 100, but it's the same mindset. You've got to change your mindset.
That's right.
When I was in Cambodia, I talk all day. When I was in Cambodia, I asked them about mommy in one of their local greens, and they said, "Why do you want to know about this?" And I said, "Well, I read a book about it. It's supposed to be very, very good." And they said, "We've been told it's a weed. Pull it out and grow cabbages, but you've got no food value." And I just put up the figures for them. Said you can eat what you like, but yours is better in just about every nutrient there is. And they just about hugged me, these really conservative ladies. They said, "We love our local plant. We hate cabbages. We thought everything west had to be best, everything from some other country." So it's, yeah. Some countries are slower to change. It's foreign plants have status.
What do you think that's about, the slower to change?
I have to watch which countries, but Africa, I have trouble convincing them. They say, "We want to be rich and educated like Europeans. We're going to eat European foods." So I had a lady in Malawi. She was a domestic science teacher, and she said, "I only teach people how to cook Western foods. We're educated." And I said, "Well, I sent a book back to another permaculture guy in Malawi who's doing exactly the opposite, trying to get them to grow all their local plants, because he said, I did my degree overseas. I know my temperate plants. I don't even know my Malawian plants." So I sent him a list of all his Malawian, well, a database of all the Malawian plants. And so it's, and sometimes it's practical. The World Vegetable Centre, they said they have terrible trouble getting anyone to do research on fruit trees and nut trees because they can't wait for the results. They can't be bothered waiting until the tree grows. So there's brilliant, that's where you get the information out of an elderly man in a village who knows, or the women are better. Most food in the world's grown by women, so I'm in a women's profession, and they have much better knowledge often than the men. So
That's interesting.
a local group here from the university went to Laos. They came back and said, people don't want to grow food plants. They want to grow cash crops. And I said, you were talking to men, weren't you? And they said, yes. And I said, well, why didn't you talk to the ladies? They want to keep their families alive and they want to. So it's interesting too.
It's a completely different mindset.
Yes. And Nancy Turner in Canada has done some lovely books. You might be familiar with her books on local plants. She's, like me on the retiring end of the spectrum. I think she might have just retired, but there's people around who've done lovely collations of traditional indigenous edible plants. And so I send out lots of posters all over the world, and many people say, oh, we've never seen a nice picture of our own plant before. It's always a Western plant, a temperate plant.
Mm-hmm.
Vanuatu in the Pacific, you just put out their 10-year agricultural policy, and it's how to grow a dozen temperate plants. And they're not in the temperate region, they're very much in the tropics. So it's just a mindset that you've got to change. So,
yeah, and it's a really powerful mind shift. It's
yeah.
looking, what's most interesting to you about the mind shift? What do you think it's about for people?
I have to watch what I say. I don't mean to be negative, but often it's Westerners interested in their own career, their own status, their own research. So I went on a World Bank project to Papua New Guinea, and eventually I pulled out. I was so embarrassed about what they were doing. I did some books and practical things. When they did the review, the headlines were $26 million spent, $26 million wasted. So I've been on other ones where, yeah, I don't want to bag all the scientists because I'm very committed to them finding all the information. But a chap went and said they need to work out how to thin out sago groves to get better production, but it's so spiny you can't get up the top and put a chemical on. And I went into a sago grove and said to a local man, what would you do? He said, I get my bush knife, chop a little hole in the sucker I didn't want, gets filled up with sago grubs. I come back in 6 weeks and I've got a lovely feed of sago grubs. And it doesn't get into the main plant. So just talking to local people. Everywhere I go, I spend hours in local markets talking to the women. They're a wealth of information. So
That's so cool.
A lot of the information is getting lost if it's not retrieved before the older people die, because they can't write it down for you. So it's.
So how do we get that information? How do we get that information then before it's lost?
I listen very carefully everywhere I go, and then I don't write down old wives' tales. I come back and search and search and search till I find a scientist. So when I was in Solomon Islands with my daughter, who's got a degree in agriculture, the lady said, if you eat this leaf, you get a much better milk supply when you're feeding your baby. Now, I came home and eventually found a scientist who'd done some research on that plant. It's not a common plant, not well studied, but she was right. She might be illiterate and in a village. So they prompt me to come back and sit down and search for the. The university here contacted me and said, we're worried about leprosy and TB on the Papuan Plateau in Papua New Guinea. And I felt like saying, go and see a doctor. And then I started searching and found if you've got good zinc and vitamin A levels, you're much less vulnerable to both leprosy and TB. So I contacted a lady yesterday who's just going down, a European lady who's going down to the Western Province, and said, I'm going to try and do some posters and books for down that area to take with you as you go, to share around, to address simple problems. There's a lovely coastal almond packed full of zinc that grows on almost every tropical beach in the world. And it's also down in that area there. So they don't even have to start again. They've just got to rediscover what's there, what can be used.
That's really, really powerful, Bruce. And I hope more and more people worldwide wake up.
Yeah, there are a lot there. They're not in the commercial sector because they can't make money out of it. But Dr. Swaminathan in India was leader of the high-tech green revolution, and then woke up one day and said, we're going down a blind alley, and wrote a book called What We Need is an Evergreen Revolution. They started this whole Swaminathan Institute, trying to get people to go back to look after nature, look after the soil, help women. And I haven't met him. I've met some of his family, but I've sent information to them and to use in their system. So I look for the people that Biodiversity International, even FAO are doing good jobs.
Mhm.
And yeah, so it's all a lot of fun. It's better than spending your old age doing jigsaw puzzles.
You are, yeah, you're just doing a different kind of jigsaw puzzle. You're doing a global jigsaw puzzle. You're doing like a 5D, a 5-dimensional
Yeah.
jigsaw puzzle. What parts of the world do you still feel like if you could tap into and learn about any part of the world, what parts would you want to learn about next or more of?
The desperately needy countries are in Africa and Asia. I think South America, it's mainly only Bolivia. Venezuela, of course, is in chaos. When the country's in chaos, it affects them. But
Mhm,
I try and stay right out of politics because it's not my cup of tea. But
mhm,
yeah, it's mainly the African countries. And Echo, Florida, have a base in Tanzania. So some of these, they've also got one in North Thailand. India is very needy. I went with my son to India, and I was surprised how poor the range of plants were in local food markets. And then we went across to Sri Lanka, and it suddenly multiplied by about 10. Sri Lanka's got a much, much richer diversity. When I was in Indonesia, I had chaps showing me around. We went to all the local food markets and they had a diversity. And then we went to the big companies that are supplying supermarkets and we're down to about 8 plants. So
mm.
those who live in cities and just buy their food in supermarkets are both stunted but also obese and suffering from malnutrition. So
Mhm. That's really fascinating because you said that India had when you saw a low diversity of food in the markets, and yet allegedly they grow a wide diversity of food for global markets.
yes, but they only normally market things that will sell in a Western world. So there are some
Mhm.
lovely foods. One in Papua New Guinea called a buku buk, which means in pidgin, it's got lumps around the side. It's a lovely fruit. It's one that I think one day will catch on in the tropical world, but a lady's been trying to import it and still hasn't got it into Australia yet. But so there are some lovely foods around. You've got to match the people's taste preferences. I'm not good if you get to a really hard, crunchy fruit, just because of old age and poor teeth. But in Africa, one they love and they chew all the time, but it's just too hard for me. So it's all our background preferences, but just matching things. If you say to them, well, add this and this and this and nuts and fruits into your sago, you can bump up your diet. The sago swamps are desperate, desperate places. They normally just survive through fish, and they put mines in which contaminate the water and kill the fish. So there breaks your heart to go into some of the sago swamps.
Yeah, that's hard. That's really hard. And so, Bruce, how do we get into how do we and when I say we, I mean like globally, how do the people with their feet on the ground and people who are able to access the communities in India and in Africa, how do we tap into that information and how do we like what are I guess what I'm asking is what conversations do we need to be having to share the information but also gather new information?
One of my daydreams, I have lots which I may not get fulfilled, is to do books. My daughter's just been on to me. She's got a postgraduate degree in nutrition and she works on that side, but to do posters, but then do PowerPoints if they've got power, and get old people to come in from the village and tell them local names. I can't, for Vanuatu, the main island's got 18 languages. So I can't put all those in, but you could build rapport between a school where the children can sit and look at the plant and then get a local village person to come in and say, help us, will you please, with local names, so we can put local names on. The next time we print the poster, it'll have local names. Bridge building. So Solomon Islands contacted me and said, can we take all your materials and put it back into all the school curriculum books, into grade 1 reading books and other things? I said, please do.
Wow.
So, and my daughter's just been chasing me we're going to Skype into India soon, and she wants me to get them all ready with little blank spaces so that someone locally can then just type in a Hindi name or something else. And I can't do the script for Hindi, but someone could write it in there. And to engage, schools tend to just grab whatever resource is around, and it tends to be a fairly selective, biased Western often. Learn to write. And if they do plants, they talk about local plants. So because they don't talk about local plants. It's foreign plants have status. So when my wife and I were in, I have to think where we were, Malaysia, I think it was, we went round all the markets, photographed all day, and then I said, I'll take you out for a meal tonight and we'll ask for nice stir-fried vegetables. And the stir-fried vegetables were all temperate Western.
Oh, you know, it reminds me of when I went to Nepal and I think it was maybe 2000 or so. And it was fascinating because when I travel, I love to eat the local food. And that's one of the things I loved about Thailand is I think they do a good job of using their local foods. And when I was in Nepal, we trekked through the Annapurna circuit, and I was just looking so forward to eating their food that they cook for themselves. And it was all this Western food and people, I think they have roads that go through there now, but people hiked for days to get that Western food up to these, I can't remember what they're called, like places where people slept, so that we could have spaghetti. And I can't remember the other things, but I was so upset because that wasn't what I was, that wasn't part of the experience I wanted. But it was fascinating to see that one, some travelers actually expected it, and two is it was very coveted amongst the locals to be able to provide that, and also to have it in their ethers.
Yes. So I often say to people who aren't necessarily agriculturalists, they might be missionaries or aid people, if you go to the country, do me a favor, go into the local market and buy local plants. Try them out, find ones you like, because it is a cultural jump to go for a different plant, but they watch, all the ladies sitting in the market watch Westerners, and they say they're rich, they're educated, they must know what's best in the market. They haven't said anything, but they walk through the market and buy a pea and a carrot and a cabbage and a tomato and walk out again. And it just biased, it's just modelling by the foods you buy. So I've tried over the years to practice what I preach. My first one 20 years ago, but we gradually were eating all local foods. And then when I got married to my wife, now she's working in Papua New Guinea, and I said, I'll cook and you get on with your job. And she'd never eaten some of the local food. She'd been there for a few years. So it was a steep learning curve for her. But
yeah, that would have been. Yeah. And then if I can just circle back to Nepal for a second, because eating local food was so important to me. I had to beg them to share their food. Like I offered to pay for it. And, but there was how do you say, it was almost, dishonoring and disrespectful to them that I would even ask, for their food. And that was, so that was a big dance that I had to go around too. And, but once I built rapport with the locals, and then I learned how to do that really quickly, then I got to learn, they started to teach me how to make their teas and how to make their their doll. And we walked into a community that had just was harvesting yak for the winter, and they're drying it. And so they showed us, they showed me how to make, they were making like all their prepared foods, and how they're using their local their plants for preparing for the winter season. So it was really, really powerful.
Yeah.
But it took a lot because they had because they didn't think we were interested in it.
Well, when my wife and I went to Vanuatu with another group of young people, the first day they tried to feed us Western vegetables. And then that night I gave my talk, and the next day they were so delighted they just swapped over totally. So then on the rest of the time we're there, they fed it. Their local food suddenly had status. Wow, they are good, they are important. But it was, it's overflow from, I think, colonialism and Western attitudes.
Yeah. Where do you think the biggest gap is, from like where we are today in the way our belief systems and globally, and where we need to move towards to where we are working with nature and living more regeneratively and living more intentionally? Where's that gap, and what do you see that we have to do to move through that gap, to close that gap?
Tied up at technology companies, machines find it very hard to grow plants naturally. If you go to Papua New Guinea, they'll have 40 different species all in the one garden, all mixed, often with a variety of each one, and it's very hard to mechanize that. But now there's a crisis coming very, very fast. Our energy consumption for machines and all that's creating a crisis. I can't think of his name at the moment. The guy who's written A Coming Famine goes through all the details of it and says, you can see we cannot keep using these very, very high energy inputs into growing food. Growing food's meant to be a solar energy activity. You capture sunlight and grow food. And now we use 10 times as much energy to grow food as you could in a natural way. As soon as you go back to mixed cultivation, the pests and the diseases just become absolutely minimal. You never see a serious pest or disease outbreak in a thoroughly mixed garden. The European comes along, says, no, this one's the highest, you grow that one, this one's the biggest, grow that one, this one's the they reduce it down to about 3 and suddenly pest and diseases break out. So, and things like mulch, beautiful programs in Zimbabwe, CADS, Cluster Agricultural Development Services, a Belgian agency, are just saying, go along, collect all the rubbish along the roadside and the footpaths, lay it amongst all your crops, and they're getting 4 and 5 times the yield of maize and other crops just by mulching in a fairly dryish area. And before they had 4 or 5 bags to feed their family for the year, and now they've got 20 bags. It's just totally transforming it. And I think I've spoken to a few farmers groups and Christian farmers groups in Australia, and I said, don't get rash the first year, just start in one corner of one paddock and start experimenting. Try out new methods, and if it's working, expand it. If you go whole house and it doesn't work, you'll be bankrupt next week. So but just try and think of simple, practical ways. One I often use in illustrations, you go into a shop here and you buy a can of mixed beans. And I want to know, why do they mix them in the factory instead of in the paddock? As soon as you grow 5 or 6 varieties of beans, you find the pest and disease suddenly drop. A chap got his PhD on in our area here, showing if you go for diversity with cabbages even, you can get away with less sprays. So it's changing a mindset.
But what you said is really powerful.
Some of the things on your website, you had agroecology, permaculture, some of those groups, and they're all in the same space. So United Nations called me an agroecologist when they employed me, and I've spoken at the permaculture, national convergences and things, and even the slow food movement. I've spoken at their groups. They're trying to go back and rediscover all the foods that we've been, in our haste to have highly processed takeaway foods. Let's go back and rediscover a diversity even in diet. So there's ways of doing it, and you just look for the groups that have the same commitment.
Yeah, and I think that's where I was going at. We're so used to thinking, we're like, we think we're thinking out of the box by how can we go bigger and better, whereas we're actually, it's not how can we go bigger and better, it's looking what's right beneath our feet.
And it's money and technology. I'm not against either money nor technology, but when they set the agenda, we go down a blind alley. So I was giving a talk to a group of international scientists here, and I thought I had a courtesy, I should stay for the next talk, a local chap here, and it's now costing them $13,000 a hectare to grow potatoes in Tasmania. 2.5 acres, if you think still an acres, which means you have to get a yield of 40 tonnes a hectare before you've broken even, and our top yield's about 46 tonnes. So we're walking on a knife edge, and you can go back to much. They've got one variety, they're tissue culturing it, it's just become so high tech and so expensive. And the Irish famine, that's why they had that, because they had one variety of potato instead of many varieties of potatoes. So we have to rethink, and I like to tap into students. We've just opened a new old church building here as a centre, and I'm hoping when the coronavirus is down, we can get students and agricultural students and others to come in. Some have been coming, to get them to rethink their whole philosophy. Ones that make me laugh: in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, potatoes being a tropical crop from the Andes suit the highlands in the tropics. So Westerners went there, said you cut them up and plant them in a row. So they're nothing else. They've never planted anything in a row in their life. So across 40 plants in a garden, they'll have one row of European potatoes. The only trouble is there's a bacterial wilt, and the only way it can spread if the plants are touching. So I say, look, forget the man who gave it. It's a nice crop. Now spread it all through your garden and the disease is gone. So it makes a real difference. Just, they don't mean it. The chap was telling him how to grow potatoes, how we grow potatoes, instead of saying cut it up and then scatter it all around your garden. So it's the same in various other places in India. I've seen illiterate farmers being taught how to put a string along and line up their plants in the garden. They don't need to.
No. And what haven't we talked about that you feel like you'd like to share with people?
We haven't talked about the soil at all, which I know is high on your agenda.
Right. Yeah, what would you like to, let's go to this, let's talk about the soil.
Our machines in the Western world now have turned soil into dirt. It's no longer soil, it's just dirt. Soil, when it's doing the right thing, is the most dynamic system in the world. They said it's more complex than even the human body. And we just pound it to dust over and over and over every year, and suddenly all the microbes, all the rhizome stuff and all the other stuff has just disappeared. And then we end up with fairly nutrient deficient plants out of the system. So CADs in Africa, again, and some of those groups are doing a lovely job, just telling them not to burn. It's easy to burn, it cleans up the garden, all the old rubbish, but you lose your sulfur and nitrogen and you kill all the microorganisms. So you just say, look, the end of the growing season, just go around and scatter cowpeas all over the paddock. They'll grow, look after your soil, they're easy to get rid of next gardening season, and just think of ways that look after the soil, restore the soil. And so it's, another big one.
It is, it's a huge one. And what are some of the ways that you found most effective to rebuild soil?
I don't want to be anti-nutrients. If you lose your nutrients, you ship them out the farm gate, you've got to get them back or you're mining the ground. But superphosphate, when you put it on the paddock, comes out the pH is, I think, 2 or 3. So it's very, very acid, which kills the microorganisms. So you might be able to find ways to mix it in with mulch or other things. Roland Crouch years ago in South America the Indians were being pushed off their land by big companies, and he went in and taught them how to use legumes to build up the soil, restore the soil, and the other ones, trees in Western Australia. They went through and chopped all the trees down to make it easy for the large machines. And now the salting is so high, the land's totally unproductive. And so when there's no trees, the soil just evaporates, the water just evaporates to the surface and brings the salt up. When there are trees, the trees pull the soil water down. And so lots of those things, the insightful ones are rediscovering and reinventing the wheel. And the ones who want to sell you a large, highly mechanized machine.
Right.
They're trying, at these farmers' conferences, they're now interplanting. They're not ploughing the old wheat row crops. They're interplanting using laser-guided computers on their tractors to just interplant for last year's crop, which helps restore the soil instead of digging it all up and pounding it to mulch. So.
Yeah. And then there's the composting, compost teas and stuff like that. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Bruce.
It's nice to catch up with you, and I'll be chasing up your website and magazine and things a bit more. So,
yeah. Well, I'll be sure to share. I'll share a special link with you so you can have it complimentary. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, much love to you, Bruce. We'll share your database in the magazine.